If you are a baby boomer or Gen X, somewhere in your kitchen right now, there is probably a plastic container with a lid that seals so tight it makes a satisfying little pop when you press it. And if you've owned that container for more than 10 years, there's a decent chance it still works perfectly. That little pop, that satisfying burp of airtight pressure, is the sound of one of the most brilliantly engineered consumer products of the 20th century. It's also the sound of a company that had every advantage in the world and still managed to run itself into the ground. This is the story of Tupperware, how it went from a genuine invention that changed American kitchens to a cautionary tale about what happens when a great product gets swallowed by a deeply broken business model. Let's go back to 1946. The world had just come out of the Second World War, and in the United States, there was this strange new material that nobody quite knew what to do with. Plastic. And not the smooth, reliable plastic we think of today. This was early plastic. It was brittle, it was smelly, it had an almost industrial quality to it that made most consumers deeply suspicious. Nobody wanted to store their food in something that looked and felt like it had just come off a factory floor. But a man named Earl Tupper saw something that everyone else was missing. Tupper was a chemist and an inventor, the kind of restless, problem-solving mind that couldn't look at a material without imagining what it could become. He got his hands on polyethylene slag, which was essentially a waste byproduct from DuPont, one of the big chemical companies of the era. Most people would have seen trash. Tupper saw potential. He spent years refining that raw material, purifying it, working out the chemistry until he had something genuinely remarkable, a plastic that was flexible, lightweight, airtight, waterproof, and completely odorless. And then he designed a lid inspired by the inverted rim of a paint can, something that created a hermetic seal unlike anything on the market. Tupperware was born. The problem? Nobody bought it. Tupper put his containers on retail shelves and consumers walked right past them. Not because the product was bad, it was actually revolutionary, but because people had no idea how it worked. You have to remember that in the late 1940s, the concept of an airtight plastic seal was genuinely unfamiliar. Shoppers would pick up a Tupperware container, press the lid on incorrectly, and put it back down thinking it was broken. The product needed a demonstration. And that's where everything changed. Enter Brownie Wise. Wise was a single mother from Georgia who had started selling Tupperware informally at home gatherings, and she was extraordinarily good at it. She had this gift for making women feel comfortable, engaged, and excited about a kitchen product, which, in the early 1950s, was no small feat. Earl Tupper noticed her sales numbers and hired her. And in 1951, he made a decision that would define the company for the next 7 decades. He pulled Tupperware completely off retail shelves and made it available exclusively through home sales parties. Now, in the context of the 1950s, this was actually a meaningful and even progressive idea. Only about 1 in 3 women were in the workforce at that time. Stay-at-home mothers had very limited avenues to earn their own money or build any kind of professional identity outside the home. The Tupperware party offered something real, a social gathering, a sense of community, and a genuine income opportunity. Brownie Wise became so central to the brand's success that in 1954 she became the first woman to appear on the cover of Businessweek magazine. She was known throughout the company as the Queen of Tupperware, and the title was earned. But here's where the story takes its first dark turn. In 1958, Wise organized a massive outdoor company event, a celebration for Tupperware's top performers. A thunderstorm rolled in, the event descended into chaos, and 21 people were injured. The lawsuits that followed were costly and damaging. Earl Tupper, who had never been particularly warm toward Wise even at the height of her success, fired her. She received no stock, no meaningful severance, and very little public acknowledgement for the empire she had helped build. Tupper then sold the entire company shortly after for around $16 million and retired to a private island. The inventor walked away. What he left behind was a sales structure, a party-based, representative-driven model, that would slowly, over the following decades, evolve into something far more troubling. By the time we get to the modern era of Tupperware, the home party model had transformed into a textbook multi-level marketing operation. And if you've never looked closely at how MLMs actually work, the Tupperware structure is a perfect place to start, because it illustrates every structural flaw with unusual clarity. The foundation of the problem is the product pricing. Tupperware charges premium prices for its containers. We're talking $20, $30, sometimes $40 for a single bowl or a small set of items. Now, you might wonder how they justify that pricing, and the honest answer is that they mostly don't. Those high prices exist to fund the layered commission structure, the so-called upline, where every sale generates a cut for the representative, then another cut for the person who recruited them, then another for the person above that. The price of the product is essentially the cost of keeping the pyramid fed, and it gets worse when you look at what consultants are actually required to spend to stay in the business. Catalogs need to be purchased out of pocket. Sample kits change constantly, and representatives are expected to keep up with those updates at their own expense. When a customer makes a special shipping request, the consultant often absorbs that cost personally. And perhaps most painfully, Tupperware has a famous lifetime warranty on its products, but when a customer invokes that warranty, it's frequently the consultant, not the corporation, who eats the replacement cost. Then there are the psychological tactics. Former consultants have described high-pressure corporate rallies that function more like revival meetings than sales training. There are stories of peer groups encouraging representatives to weaponize personal tragedy. One former consultant recalled being advised to use her mother's terminal cancer diagnosis as a selling point, to guilt her social circle into buying products out of sympathy. When a business model relies on that kind of emotional manipulation to move product, something has gone deeply wrong. And the numbers, when you actually look at them, are devastating. Based on figures from around 2015, the average Tupperware consultant was making roughly $260 per year. That's not per month. That's the entire year, before expenses. Under $22 a month. And unlike some MLM categories where you can theoretically build a return business on consumables, your health supplements, your skincare products, things people run out of, plastic containers don't get used up. A good Tupperware piece can last 20 or 30 years. The market saturates almost immediately because there is no natural repurchase cycle. You are quite literally selling people something they will never need to buy again. Financially, the consequences of all of this accumulated over time like water finding a crack in a foundation. By 2020, Tupperware's stock had collapsed from a high of $96 per share to just $2.60. A major class action lawsuit involving Fuller Cosmetics, a beauty brand that Tupperware had acquired in Mexico, alleged that the company lacked effective internal financial controls, had failed to properly account for its liabilities, and had been issuing false and misleading earnings guidance to its investors. The brand that had once been synonymous with American domestic ingenuity was now mired in accounting scandals and investor lawsuits. And then came September of 2024. Tupperware Brands filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in Delaware, carrying over $800 million in debt. The company's stock, which had already been in free fall, dropped to just 51 cents a share before trading was suspended. The CEO cited a challenging macroeconomic environment in her statement, but the more honest accounting is this: Tupperware had failed to adapt to e-commerce, failed to build any meaningful presence on platforms like Amazon, and had clung to a direct sales model that belonged to a completely different era of American life. By October 2024, a federal bankruptcy judge approved the sale of Tupperware's assets to a group of its own lenders for just $23.5 million in cash, with an additional $63 million in debt converted to ownership. The party, as more than a few headlines noted, was over. The story of Tupperware is ultimately a story about the difference between a great product and a great company. Earl Tupper genuinely invented something remarkable. The airtight seal, the flexible plastic, the practical elegance of those containers, that was real innovation, and it deserved the success it found. But the business built around it prioritized an ever-expanding layer of middle earners over the people actually doing the work. It priced its products to feed a structure rather than to serve a customer. It mistook the cultural moment of the 1950s for a permanent business model and never let go, even as the world changed entirely around it. The next time you hear that satisfying pop of a Tupperware lid, think about Brownie Wise, who built an empire and was thanked with a pink slip. Think about the thousands of consultants who were told they were building a business, when the math said otherwise from the very beginning. And think about how easily a genuine innovation can become a cautionary tale when the people running it stop asking whether it actually works for everyone involved.